All right, macaroni and cheese demo. Who doesn't like macaroni and cheese? Really popular demo, really easy to do. Hopefully after you watch this demo, you will be encouraged to make some macaroni and cheese at home. So let's just get into it. One of the first things I want to do that is not on your recipe that you have, so if you want to pencil it in, write it in, type it in, is that I want to preheat my oven to 400 degrees. Preheat to 400 degrees. Because when I'm done and I have my macaroni and cheese in my pan, I'm going to want to bake it. So I'm going to bake the top to get it nice caramelized golden brown. We'll talk about a breadcrumb topping if you choose to do that later. But I want to preheat my oven so it's nice and hot to get my mac and cheese a nice lovely topping. So my first steps here in my steps here, my blank. In a large sauce pot, bring salted water to a boil and boil pasta until done, about 9 minutes. So we want salted water in my pot to cook my pasta in. So I have a pretty decent sized pot here, a nice stock pot. Salted water. I want my water to be salted. You may have heard this, that you want your water to be salted. I've heard lots of different tricks of like, why are you doing that? Like, because it makes the pasta cook better, because it makes it not stick as much. It's to flavor our pasta. It's to flavor the pasta. So my pasta that I have, I'm going to use cavatappi pasta today, just because that's what I have on hand. But this pasta, it's great. It's really just dried flour. It's flour and egg. Maybe a little bit of salt in there, but there's not a lot of salt. There isn't a lot of flavor to this. Pasta is great and pasta is wonderful, but there isn't a lot of flavor happening in this exact pasta here. I can make my cheese sauce and I can put a lovely flavored sauce on top of my pasta, but to have a perfectly balanced dish is I want all of my components that are going into my dish to all be perfectly seasoned independently, and then as they come together all even more perfectly seasoned and make a really great dish. So the only way that I can season my pasta itself, not smother it with something flavorful, but actually season it itself, is to salt my water that it's being cooked in. So to salt my water that's being cooked in, I'm gonna generously salt my water. This pot isn't super full because I don't have a ton of pasta, maybe just a little more than halfway full, and that's probably maybe a tablespoon of salt. So a tablespoon of salt, super salty. Worked for a chef that always said salty like the sea, salty like the sea. So if you were to taste it carefully after the salt has dissolved, salty like the sea. It should be, oh, that tastes like salt. So keep that in mind. Salt water, salty water to season your pasta. This is the only time we get to season the pasta itself. If you are a fan of spice, you could also season your pasta by putting pepper flakes in there, and then that pepper flake, some of the heat from the pepper flake will go into your pasta. I've seen pasta boiled with peppers, like actual fresh peppers or habanero peppers, and then the water gets hot, and then the pasta absorbs that heat if you're into heat. So a few different ways that you could do that if you wanted to. The other point here that we're trying to make is boiling water. Fill my salt container. My boiling water. So I want to make sure that my water is boiling. How do I know my water is boiling? I'm going to see big bubbles. The only thing boiling is ever really good for is pretty much pasta. I don't want to boil my stock. I don't want to boil my soup for very long. I don't want to boil vegetables. I simmer those types of things, but I do want to boil pasta. So that means I want to see those big giant bubbles boiling, not simmering, not steaming, but actually boiling. So make sure that your water comes to an actual boil before we even start adding our pasta. Boiling, salted water. So let's talk about our pasta. How much pasta do we have? I need 1.5 cups of pasta. So this recipe is good for 1.5 cups of pasta. This also is great because I'm going to use this 8x8 pan. So this is going to produce me one 8x8 pan. My recipe says elbow macaroni. I have this cavatappi pasta. That actually translates, it's Italian for corkscrew, so you'll see it's corkscrewed. This is what I have on hand, so I'm using it. So that's why I'm using a different shaped pasta. This is great. You can definitely use different shaped pastas. Have fun with it. You don't have to use elbow macaroni. Take a look at the baking or the boiling, the cooking instructions on your pasta. This one says about 9 minutes. 9 minutes is a pretty classic safe bet for all your pasta's cooking time. So 9 minutes is what I'm going to cook this for. If you are doing different shapes, if you're going to do some different shapes, I would suggest cooking them separately because the different shapes are going to have maybe a slight variation in cooking time. So try to think about different, if you're going to do different shapes, cook them separately. But one shape, I'm doing this cavatappi because what I have on hand. And then make sure that when you are measuring, that we have that mound happening because this is an odd shape. So we want to make sure that we're mounding when we're measuring our odd shapes such as pasta. All right, so I got salted water that's going to boil here soon. Well, maybe not soon. Soon enough. A stirring device for my pasta and its water. My pot now, it has heat on it and a lid. I'm going to get to a boil a lot faster if I have a lid. It will come to a boil if I don't have the lid on it, but it's going to help harbor in that heat and boil a lot faster with the lid. So if you have a lid, get the lid on there. It's going to come to a boil a lot faster for you. All right, so my next ingredient is 2 tablespoons of butter. 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm just going to get that in my saucepan now because I know that's where it needs to go. Take a look at a few of my other ingredients and get that mise en place taken care of, right? All my mise en place. I have all my ingredients set out and ready to go, but nothing's really measured. My cheese isn't grated yet. What do I need to do to get ready before I even turn any heat on to my sauce pot? Let's jump down here to some whole milk. Whole milk. 1.5 cups of whole milk. 1.5 cups whole milk. I am using my liquid measuring device. I am bringing my cup down to my counter. It stays on the counter. My eyes go down to the cup. For 1.5 cups of milk. One and a half cups of milk here. All right, cream cheese. Cream cheese, I just need 2 ounces. 2 ounces of cream cheese. I have some of this brick that I have in my cooler. So if you get the bricks here, you might notice that when you use the bricks, they have the little lines on them that tell you exactly how many little lines is an ounce or 2 ounces or 6 ounces. So it's really convenient if you buy the bricks because the little foil wrapping will tell you that it's 2 ounces right here on the bottom. So really, really helpful if you buy the bricks because it takes all the guesswork out for you. You can just cut down the line just like your butter sticks do. 2 ounces of cream cheese. Now I need cheddar cheese. How much cheddar cheese? I need 1 cup of cheddar cheese. So my cheddar cheese, I will grate on my cheese grater here. I need 1 cup. When I go to measure my 1 cup, I want to make sure that I am not packing that cup down very hard. You get down to the bottom, you kind of have some chunks. That's okay. This one's a little bit big. I'll see how I can shave that one down. All right, let's see what we got here. Oh, that'll be just fine. So don't pack that cup. We just grated it, so we don't want to like put all those little grates back together. We don't want this solid cup. So it should stay a little fluffy. And then it's okay if it mounds a little bit because it is a little fluffy. We're trying to avoid packing it down really, really hard. This recipe is nice and easy to switch out your cheeses. So if you wanted a different type of cheese, you can certainly do that. If you wanted a pepper jack cheese, a mozzarella, a provolone, you can certainly get a few different cheeses in there. I recommend keeping the cheddar cheese in there because the cheddar cheese helps with the creaminess of your Mornay or your cheese sauce that we are creating. And then now it asks for American cheese. My American cheese that I'm going to add is 3 ounces. 3 ounces of American cheese. I have sliced American cheese here. And yes, I happen to have a scale, but let's see how many slices it is. If you don't have a scale, we can definitely give you a better direct amount for slices if you don't have a scale. Oh, that'll do it. So what was that? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 6 slices. 3 ounces or 6 slices. Oops. Just gonna tear this. I don't need it super small, but I would like it to be smaller than its giant slice it has. And now I have my cheeses. I've got cheddar cheese, cream cheese, got my milk, sanitize my scale. All right, a couple more things for my mise en place. I have mustard powder. Mustard powder for 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon of mustard powder. I'm just going to level it off inside my container. The mustard powder helps kind of give a little extra zing, a little more flavor at the end of your sauce there. I've definitely made this with just not dried mustard, like fresh mustard, so like a Grey Poupon or some sort of like stone ground mustard, that would work as well. I would avoid yellow mustard if you didn't have dry mustard. But it kind of just helps with the flavor. If you don't have mustard at home, you could certainly forego that. If you wanted to add some Tabasco, something else to give it a little zing, you could certainly do that. A little flexibility there when making this one. All right. My last thing that I'm going to need is flour. I'm going to need 2 tablespoons of flour to get my roux to make my sauce. So I'll just measure that as I need it with my sauce here and my saucepan. All right, so now we're ready to start making our cheese sauce, or better known as our Mornay. Our Mornay is going to be our cheese sauce. We'll start out with a bechamel. It's going to start as a bechamel where it's going to be thickened, just milk thickened with a white roux. We're going to add some cheese, and voila, we have a brand new sauce, and it's called a Mornay. All right, so getting started with my sauce pots. I'm still waiting for this water to boil here, so I'm not going to worry about it. My salted water has not come to a boil yet. We'll notice it. We'll start to see some steam pop up throughout underneath the lid. So for my second blank, it says, while pasta is cooking, melt butter in a medium saucepan. Once melted, add the flour and make a roux. So your second blank is roux, spelled R-O-U-X. R-O-U-X for roux. Our roux is our thickening agent for our sauces. And a standard roux is just going to be equal parts butter to flour. So if you ever get worried or confused, how much flour do I need? Well, how much butter do we start with? I've got 2 tablespoons of butter, so I'm going to need 2 tablespoons of flour. Pretty easy to remember, equal parts. Other fats you can use is bacon. It's a popular one. So I want to just gently melt this butter. My heat isn't very high. I'm just barely at a medium. So I would say a medium-low heat to nice and gently melt my butter. I don't want this butter to be bubbling and spitting and spurting, browning. I don't want brown butter. I just want some melted butter so that once it is melted, I can add my flour. Once it's melted, I'll add flour. I don't want to add it yet. I do want to make sure that my butter is melted. There's something for my flour to absorb. I have my spatula. My spatula is going to be really good to use, and then my whisk. I'm going to be kind of interchanging throughout both of these as I make my Mornay here. All right, I'd say that's good and melted. There's just a small chunk there, but I'm sure it'll be melted by the time I come back with my 2 tablespoons of flour. Try to get that down there where I want it, next to my melted butter. So make sure that you are completely incorporating all bits of flour, that you don't have dry pockets of flour, and you don't have flour that's come up the side of your pot. That's why I tried to get my tablespoon in there to dump it, so I didn't get flour kind of hanging out over the top and the sides of my pot here. If I'm leaving flour unincorporated with fat, so if I just have dry flour in here, that's how I get a grainy sauce. I will get a grainy sauce if I have dry flour somewhere that's not incorporated in my butter. So a classic roux, equal parts fat and flour, traditionally butter. The consistency is a lot like wet sand. A lot of people will compare it to wet sand. It might hold a shape for a second and then kind of lose its shape. If I wanted to make a darker sauce, or maybe I was doing some Creole cooking and I wanted a darker roux, I would just continue to slowly toast this. And I would be toasting my flour. It would get a darker color to it. It would smell nutty. The flour would be toasting. So if I wanted for some reason to make a darker roux, that's how I would do it. Just nice, slow, gentle heat. Take a little bit of time. So now I'm ready to add my 1.5 cups of milk. And at this point, I'll switch to my whisk really quick. I am just going to go back and forth, so I'm going to hang on to my spatula. But as soon as you add liquid to your roux kind of wants to clump up and then sink to the bottom really easily. So I want to be stirring this pretty frequently to make sure that my roux doesn't clump up and make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom. That's why I really like this whisk. This corner fits into, or the spatula, this corner fits into the bottom of the pot really well, just like I did with my chowder, so that I can be scraping up bits of roux as it falls into the corners and sinks to the bottom. I want to make sure that I have this getting nice and warm. Once this is warm and it's not quite a simmer, but once it's heating, it will start to thicken, just like my chowder did. It's going to start to thicken, but I want to just be careful I'm not getting my heat too high. It's not coming to a boil. Just a hair under a simmer is really good. I don't want to say a full simmer, because I don't want this to scorch, and I don't want this to brown. While my milk is coming to heat, come up to just barely a simmer, I can add my cream cheese, and now my cream cheese can warm with my milk. So I prefer to kind of break this up. This is my 2 ounces of cream cheese, just so it can kind of melt and dissolve a little bit quicker. All right, so let's go back and check our blanks out for our recipe. It says here that my second blank was roux, because I made that roux with the melted butter and the flour. Make sure all make sure that the flour, make sure all flour is incorporated before adding the milk. Sorry. So your third blank is flour. Make sure all flour is incorporated before adding the milk. Third blank is flour. We whisked in the milk, so whisk in milk. Remove any clumps of flour, so this is just kind of a constant checking and making sure that our roux isn't making clumps and sinking to the bottom. Add the cream cheese and continue to stir until sauce is thickened and cream cheese has melted. So right now I just want to make sure that this is getting warm and that my cream cheese is melting. My roux is going to be thickening. So that's all I want to do at this point. Is kind of keep an eye on this, make sure that it's coming up to a heat, and that my sauce is going to thicken, my cream cheese is melting. You might see some steam coming from my boiling pot of salted water. So that's exactly what I want to see. So now I'm ready to add my pasta. Give it a stir. Set a timer for 9 minutes. And you want to be stirring your pasta occasionally. You definitely want to stir it once it goes into your pot of boiling water so it doesn't clump together and it also doesn't stick to the bottom. It will clump together and stick to the bottom if you just dump it in and ignore it and never stir it. So stir it occasionally. You don't have to constantly stir it, but you just want to keep an eye on it so it doesn't stick to itself, stick to the bottom. I'm also going to get my colander ready to go in my sink. I'm making sure that part of my sink is empty and ready to go so that I can drain pasta. Because when I want to drain my pasta, I want to drain my pasta. I don't want to waste any time with trying to clean my sink, make room, make a mess, have any accidents. So I want to make sure I've got somewhere to dump that hot water when I need to. My cream cheese is melting. There's a few clumps in there. It's slowly thickening, but it's getting there. It's definitely not something that happens super instantaneously with our roux. It does need a little bit of time to get that flour to thicken, but it does happen. If you're standing here stirring and stirring and stirring, it might be one of those things where you're standing here too much, too often. You don't see anything happen. So it might be a case where you need to go take a step away and then come back to it, see if it's thickened. Not a really long time, a short time. You could walk away and see if it's a little bit thicker, but it tends to be one of those things where you stare at it all the time. You never notice the differences that are happening. So once my pasta is done, or after the 9 minutes has gone off, I want to check my pasta for doneness. I'm always trying to check everything for seasoning, check it for taste, for doneness, all those things. Well, how do I do that? I'm going to have to taste it. So I have a lot of students come ask me, hey, can you come see if my pasta is done? No, I cannot come see if your pasta is done, but I can come taste it with you and taste if your pasta is done. That's the best indicator I have to see if my pasta is finished. So keep that in mind. Give it a quick taste after the 9 minutes just to ensure that it's done, because the package directions can tell me all day long that that's what it wants me to do, but I don't want to take everything for granted. I'll just make sure I can check it myself, and I'll taste it to make sure it's done. So this is definitely starting to thicken. It is starting to stick to the side of the pot. You can kind of get that glare off of there. That's a little better. It's definitely sticking to my spatula, which is hard to see because I have white sauce on a white spatula. So my next steps here, slowly add the cheddar and American cheese in thirds. Your fourth blank is thirds. And make sure it is well mixed before adding more. So I just want to add my cheese. I have both of my cheeses here in a bowl, and I'm just going to add them somewhat slowly. I mean, it doesn't have to be super slow, but I just don't want to add everything all at once. I want to give everything kind of a chance to get a little warm before I add the next clump, and just kind of gradually add that in. See just a few chunks of cream cheese, so I'm trying to whisk those away, and it's working pretty well. All right, that's a lot smoother. I'm obviously can see it much closer, so I can see little chunks of cream cheese that weren't quite melted, and that whisk really helped it out. So just a little bit of cheese. It doesn't have to be completely melted, but like I said, just kind of give it a little bit of a head start before we just kind of bombard it with all the others. If you wanted to add more cheeses, you could certainly add more cheeses to have like a bigger variety, because we have, you know, the cream cheese here, we have cheddar cheese and American cheese. But if you wanted a different flavor of cheese, you could certainly do that. I just would not go beyond this amount of cheese. So we have the 3 ounces of the American cheese and the 1 cup of cheddar cheese. So I would just cut down the cheddar cheese to half a cup and add another half cup of something else. So try not to overdo the amount of cheese, because this milk will only take so much cheese. There will become a point where the sauce will break, what we call break, and that's where kind of the natural oils in our cheese and our liquid tend to separate, and we don't have this cohesive, beautiful sauce. We have something that is broken and oily and not appetizing in any form. So then now my next step is season the sauce with salt and pepper and our mustard powder. We will taste and adjust seasoning. So I've got a few more minutes on my pasta. Looks like we're getting good timing here. Let me get my mustard powder in here. I think I might use my whisk. Just kind of whisk that powder in really quick. And then my pepper. Salt and pepper to taste. So if you like more pepper, add some more. I probably have maybe half a teaspoon of pepper in there. And now my salt. So let's talk about salt some more. Talked about our salted water, pasta water. So I just want to be careful with how much salt I'm going to put into this sauce. The things I want to consider are how much salt is already in here, because I've already added salt in here without even like actually adding salt. I added the bigger culprits here are going to be my American cheese and my cheddar cheese. My cheddar cheese is going to have a lot of salt in it on purpose, and that's okay. But I just want to make sure that before I add more salt, I'm aware of what I already have in here. So that's just being aware of what ingredients you're working with. Tasting your ingredients separate. So maybe I need to taste my ingredients separately. Maybe I'm doing a recipe and I've never tasted prosciutto before. Taste your prosciutto. How salty is it? So just be aware with how much salt is possibly in here already. So I just want to go a little light. My cheddar cheese is the bigger culprit in here, because my cheddar cheese, I'm using Tillamook cheddar cheese. And if you don't know anything about Tillamook cheddar cheese, it is very award-winning and very popular and very tasty. Well, why is it so award-winning? Why is it so popular? Why is it so tasty? Because it has a decent salt percentage to it. It has a fair amount of salt in it. Whether that salt is coming from the cheesemakers, which, yes, probably coming from the cheesemakers, human and non-human. The cows that are making the milk that go into the cheese, they are adding some salt into the milk that goes into the cheese. How are they doing that? Because it's Tillamook cheddar cheese. Where do they live? In Tillamook, or roundabouts Tillamook. They're by the sea. They're salty like the sea. They're breathing air that's salty like the sea. Seas, trees, and ocean breeze. That's what's by the ocean. And cows that make milk. So the cows that are next to the ocean in Tillamook, where the cheese is made, that's where they get their little salty air that they're breathing. And some of that salty air that they breathe has to go into their cheese. It has to. Not a ton, but a little bit does. But again, that's why that cheese is delicious. That's why that cheese is award-winning. That's why that's the cheese I only use. I prefer to use that cheese if I can. So just consider those things. Tasting your ingredients separately, knowing your ingredients separately, understanding your ingredients separately, all will help play a part into having a perfectly seasoned finished product. All right, pasta water is timed off. The timer's gone off, which is a good time because I need to taste my sauce, and then now I can taste my pasta. My sauce is pretty much done. I have the cheese that's thickened it, the roux has thickened it. It's got some seasoning in it, but I turned my heat off. So I'm playing with my pasta now. I turned the flame off of this because I can still taste this and adjust the seasoning if I'm not happy with it, but I also don't want to run the risk of scorching it and letting it come to a boil. So Don't worry about letting this come just off the heat. I'm gonna say a minute longer. And then now I can taste my sauce. It's still gonna stay hot for a very, very long time. And I'm just going to add hot pasta to my hot sauce, so I'm not worried about anything cooling down. I'm also gonna finish it in the oven. Oh, that sauce is good. So I did not add a lot of salt. I added maybe 2 little pinches. Again, if you want a amount to start with, I would start with just a half a teaspoon. Half a teaspoon, stir it in, taste it, adjust it, taste it, adjust it. You're not going to know unless you taste it. So get used to tasting your food. I would hate to have all this put together, serve it to somebody, and then they would say, ooh, this is under-seasoned. Can I get the salt? Or, hey, this is too salty. There's not much I can do about it. Once you've over-salted something, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. I could probably stretch this sauce. I could add more milk, but that would mean I'd have to add more cheese and add more roux, so I could fix it. Also be aware with your pasta water, salty like the sea, you can over-salt your pasta water. So like I said, I did this pot here with about a tablespoon of salt. And this is working out well. I can taste my pasta is salty, but not overly so. So that's better. And drain that. But if you were to oversalt your pasta water, it's just going to transfer right into your pasta, and now your pasta is going to be overly salty, and that's going to go into your finished product. So if you were to oversalt your pasta, again, there's not a ton that you can do. You can maybe try to rinse it off, and that might help save it a little bit. So just take those little bit of salt bits in stride. You just do, a little bit of salt. You can, like I said, always taste your water. You want it salty like the sea, but you don't want it to just be overly crazy salty. All right, so I'm just going to add my cooked pasta to the pot I got my sauce in. I'll rinse off my sink really quick. If you're rinsing or draining things in your sink, like starchy things like potatoes and pasta, I always like to rinse my sink quickly, because if we don't get to it right away, those starchy liquids that we've just drained tend to stick to our sink and make our cleanup really difficult. We end up having to do a lot more scrubbing at the end, and it's not very fun. So just a quick rinse tends to help with your cleanup. All right, so now I've got some mac and cheese. You can definitely tell it's still steaming. It's still very, very hot. You could certainly eat it this way. If you didn't want to worry about it being browned on the top, have that caramelized, crunchy top, you could bowl this up, eat it just the way it is. You could certainly do that. All right, so I've got my pasta in my pot. So as I mentioned, you could definitely eat it like this if you wanted to. But we're going to go ahead and get it into the pan so we can brown the top. And I like to just have a browned cheesy top. I just like this extra sauce here. Brown the top that way. Get this in the oven, and then we'll talk about a breadcrumb topping, if that's what you choose to do. All right, 20 minutes in the oven to get a brown. 20 minutes to get a brown top on your mac and cheese. I also now have a completely clean workstation. I got some stuff that needs to go back in the refrigerator. I do have some dishes soaking in my sink, but they're soaking, which is good. They need to be soaking, but everything else is done, out of my way. Ingredients are put away, except for what's on my cart. I should get to that shortly. So if you wanted to have a breadcrumb topping on top of your mac and cheese, you certainly could. Like I said, I just prefer that nice cheesy top to it. You could maybe add some additional shredded cheese and get that browned on the top. That would be fine. I just grew up with my mom putting that sauce on the top and browning that. So your breadcrumb topping. If you want to do a breadcrumb topping, you absolutely can. But you need to add some butter to it. So if you were to just take breadcrumbs and pour that over the top, get in the oven, it's still just going to be dry, toasty breadcrumbs. You want some fat in there from the butter to help get it caramelized and a little tastier, and add a little bit of moisture into there. I don't want that to just be super dry breadcrumbs, because then it's going to come off as just super dry breadcrumbs. So add some butter. So what would we be adding? I would suggest doing half a cup of the breadcrumbs. You can do Italian like spice seasoned breadcrumbs. The seasoned breadcrumbs are delicious, super great. I use those all the time. You can just use a plain Japanese panko breading, which has no seasoning to it at all. You could do that. So half a cup of breadcrumb, whatever you choose for that, half a cup. And then that would go with 4 tablespoons of melted butter. Half a cup of the breadcrumbs, 4 tablespoons of melted butter. Again, melted, make sure it's melted. And then you would just add your breadcrumbs to that, mix it up. You just want to make sure that kind of when you if you were to pinch it or kind of put it in your fist, that it kind of holds its shape for a little bit before it breaks open. That's a good test to see that you have enough butter in there. Sprinkle that over the top, and then you can bake it for 20 minutes, and then you have that golden brown breadcrumb topping, golden brown. So again, it's not dry breadcrumb, that it's going to be a nice, delicious, moist breadcrumb, not very dry. So make sure you're adding fats to your breadcrumb if you need to. So our last blank, if I didn't go over that in detail, our last blank is seasoning, because remember, we're going to taste and adjust seasoning. Taste and adjust seasoning. We can always just taste and adjust our seasoning. So even if we're a little nervous about adding how much salt and pepper, add a little bit, taste it. Add it before you add the salt and pepper. If we're worried about how much salt has been added with our cheese that we did, taste it before, and then get a judge of like, oh, it's perfect, that's enough, or let's add some more. So taste, 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 adjust seasoning. And then now it's baking for 20 minutes, so we'll be back after it's nice and golden brown. All right, so now I've got some delicious looking macaroni and cheese. How about something like this, nice and hot, came out of the oven. Little details that you're probably not seeing is the top of these noodles are nice and caramelized and golden brown. I definitely have nice caramelized golden brown in the middle there. But that's just how I like it. So like I said, you can do your breadcrumb topping. Just make sure you're setting that timer and taking a look at it. 400 degrees is pretty hot, so don't be ignoring it. In that time, I was able to clean up, put away all my ingredients, put away all my dishes. So then now, hopefully I can enjoy my mac and cheese, and I don't have this giant mess kind of looming over me. I like to enjoy my meal with a clean kitchen. It's just how I like to work. But that's it. That's your macaroni and cheese. Hopefully you are able to try it at home. If you can't, no worries. But nice and easy, and very accessible ingredients, right? Nothing that's too crazy, everything we can find at the grocery store.